Hey guys, Elder High Priestess Tehila here from the Covenant of the Open Mind. Hail and welcome. This is the fourth lecture in our Astrology 101 series. I apologize for the long delay for those of you who are following this in real time. There's a lot of retrogrades going on. Many of you probably know that. And they wreaked havoc on my life personally, so that's been the delay. But here we are. Time to talk about the planets. If you haven't watched the previous lectures, I suggest you go back and check them out just so that you're going in the right order here. But otherwise, let's get started. Oh, I guess I have to click. There we go. Wouldn't switch slides for me. Okay. So, the first thing that we need to talk about when we talk about the planets is the difference between the solar house and the sun sign. So in popular astrology, everyone knows what their solar house is. And they think that, hey, this is my solar house, that's my entire sign, that's my entire identity. Okay, and they get very attached to that identity sometimes and are not very inclined to consider that their sun is actually in a different location. And so the solar months used to, at some point in time, match with the actual amount of time that the planets spent in each constellation, give or take, a long time ago. But it turns out that, first of all, the signs are all not the same size. So the planets spend a different amount of time in each. The planets also move at varying speeds, so depending on how things align, sometimes the planets are moving faster or slower, so the planets don't spend the same amount of time in each constellation every year. And if you, like me, believe that there is a real scientific basis behind astrology, then you should, in fact, care where the planets actually are in space, right? So for that reason, you have to use an astronomy tool and not an astrology tool to look up where things are. Because even really good astrology tools, like I think Cafe Astronomy is one, even the really good ones don't have the correction for planetary precession in them. So even the really good astrology tools are closer than, say, getting your horoscope out of a newspaper, because you're at least considering all the planets, and you must consider all of the planets, because the way that the planets interact with each other and with the signs in the chart is so intricate that no two charts are ever 100% identical. I mean, even twins can have different star charts, unless they're born like within the same minute, I guess, within the same couple of minutes. And that's how complex these charts can be. So you have to know where in the world you were born, when, and all that information, because otherwise you're not getting all of the correct data. If you don't have accurate data, then how can you do an accurate reading? Accurate data is important. So when you talk about doing natal charts for people, you need to know where the planets are in space, and that requires you to go to an astronomy tool like Stellarium, which is what we're using in this course. So again, I did a Stellarium tutorial in the last video, so if you have not seen that, go and download Stellarium, check out that tutorial if you need help, and I also give a template for copying down your signs into like a chart that you can just use Microsoft Paint, and you can just drag and drop the symbols, copy and paste them where they go. It's actually the same chart that I use in my professional readings. So there you go. It's a professional tool. And once you have everything, at the end of this one, we'll have all the planets filled in. And I think I showed in the tutorial last time how to do the planets, even though we're going to talk about what they mean this time, just so the tutorial was all in one video. So go and check that out if you haven't already. If you need help getting your correct star information from a tool that actually is used to line up telescopes and is 100% accurate. If it was even off by a tiny fraction of a degree, then you would not be able to line up the telescope to view deep space objects. So Stellarium is what they use, at all of the cool high-tech science facilities. So that is what you should use to get your star information as well. So the solar month or the solar house, however, that is just, you take the year, it's 360 degrees, you divide it up into 12 parts, and each one is a set number of degrees, 30 degrees, and those are set dates that fit into the, that fit perfectly into the wheel. And those use the conventional and well-known dates that are up there. So from like the 21st to the 22nd of each month. The solar house, therefore, may differ from the sun sign. In fact, for most people born after the 1950s, it does. Before the 1950s, the difference was so slight that people were still, even though they were closer along, it only matters, it would only have mattered if you were looking at the decans before about the 1950s or early 1900s. Now it matters a lot more because almost every single person who's born has a different solar house than sun sign. The solar house and sun sign differ. If they mean different things, they're similar. Okay, they both govern expression, but solar house is how other people interpret your intended expression, and the solar and the sun sign is how you choose to express yourself. So it's like both halves of the conversation, if you think about it. So a lot of people will think that you are like your solar house when in fact you're more like your sun sign. And again, sometimes it lines up and it's the same, and those people are typically very straightforward, or at least people know them well. I mean, it depends on what signs we're talking about. But when the solar house and the sun sign, solar house and sun sign differ, in that case, there's almost always going to be a lot of misperceptions, misunderstandings about people, that sort of thing, where people will interpret someone's actions in an incorrect way from what was intended. They won't understand the original intention of the person. It's especially obvious in some cases. It depends on the planetary placement, which sign is rising. So I did a chart recently where the solar house was different, but the solar house and the rising sign were the same. So this person's a Libra, rising, Libra, solar house. We'll talk about what rising means in the next lecture on houses. Because her sun sign was Virgo, what happened is, people will think that she's harsh and that she comes off harsh, but only because of communication, because that's what her Mercury is also in Virgo, so that has an aspect. And because her solar month is Libra, oftentimes people will view her as being strict but fair, even if her comments are coming from a place of judgment. Like even if she's flat out being like, "No, I don't like that," other people will still view that as her, kind of being that fair, giving you something you don't want to hear that you need to hear type of person. So it's very hard for her to come off wrong, but eventually she wears on people who spend a lot of time with her. So that's what that interaction means. So if you see, these are very specific things that I'm saying, and when you get into real astrology, you do get that specific. So it's really cool how specific you can get. So that's the difference between the solar house and the sun sign. The solar house is not technically a planet. It's more of an aspect than anything else. But I like to talk about it here because people often confuse the two of them. So your sun sign might not match your solar house, and you should not have an epic meltdown if it doesn't. And it's particularly hard to convince people when their sun sign is Taurus, but they think they're a Gemini. Fun fact, I had a friendship end over that exact discussion. So, some people get very attached to their solar house, and that's the bane of my existence, because that's what pop astrology does to people. But anyway, so now we're going to talk about each planet. I'll give you their associations, keywords, and their return. I'll talk a bit about what the return means. We'll start with the sun. So the sun is not technically a planet, right? It's in astrology we call the sun and moon luminaries. Okay, luminaries are the two, they give light off, right? And they're the two planets, quote unquote, that are not planets, that later in life were designated not planets. Bear in mind that astrology was developed before the sun and moon, before we knew that all the sun and everything revolved back when they thought, rather, that the sun and everything all revolved around Earth. So they thought the sun and moon were planets like any others, but they were luminaries because they gave light. And that's where the terminology comes from. Now we know that they're not really planets, but they do still have an impact on us. In fact, the largest impact. So the sun sign, the moon sign, and then also the rising sign, which we'll talk about next week, are the three most important signs because they set the framework of the entire chart. And by and large, you will embody many qualities from those three signs. So if the only three you looked at were those three, fine. But guys, come on, look at all the planets. It's really important because sometimes things don't manifest exactly the way that you expect them to. And I'm hoping that I can get an example of that when we talk, when we do some example charts later on. For now, we're just talking about each planet in turn, and then we'll talk a bit about how they interact with each other later on. So for the sun, you'll see all of these have different associations. Each one has an element, a body part, sign, a day, a color. There's probably lots more tarot cards, whatever. People associate all sorts of things together all the time. Some people disagree about what associates with what, so I've provided all of the information that I have. But I'm sure that there's other ways of doing it as well. The sun is usually associated with the element fire, obviously, but also spirit, because the sun is something that has historically given us the ability to see wisdom. That's how people have viewed it in the past. They've seen, they've considered that when the sun is out and you can see, that's a metaphor for being able to metaphysically see in, using the third eye. It aligns with the heart and the spine. So that's, the fire center and the part that sustains us, the part that keeps us up. The sign is Leo. That's pretty obvious, I would think, for most people who now you know the zodiac. Now you all know the zodiac, right? You watch my videos. So pretty obvious that one, right? The center of attention, the one that's glowing and always the center of attention even when they don't want to be. Day is Sunday, get it? Color is gold. And then for the keywords, the sun, it represents the individual self. It represents your will, your center of power. It's your consciousness, like how you decide to express yourself to the world and interact with the world, who you want to be. Okay. That's your, and so the sun sign is who you want to be. The solar house is who people think you are. And the moon sign is how you feel and who you really are. And the rising sign is your true self, the nature of your being, and deep down who you really are. So those are the four main parts that you need to know as a summary. The sun is just your conscious outward expression, who you want to be, how you choose to act, your creative self, and in some regard, how the world sees you. But again, it's interpreted through that solar house, through the lens of the solar house. Okay, the moon associated with water and spirit. Most people would probably have guessed that. The body parts are the stomach and the breast. The sign is Cancer. Very watery, emotional, protective sign, right? So that makes sense. Its day is Monday. Get it? Okay, color silver. And then this planet represents the inner waters, the thoughts, emotions, your receptivity and imagination, memories, how you connect to the world, basically how you feel, how you bring things into yourself. It can also describe your life's journey, and because those are intimately related. And I forgot to talk about what the return means. So when we say a return, what we're talking about is that the planet has gone all the way around and is in the same part of the sky as it was at the time and date of your birth, right? So with the sun, the return is 365 days. It's a year, right? That one's easy. The moon is 28 days. Again, easy. That's the cycle that you're familiar with, right? The full moon comes once a month. So the full moon is technically a return, right? And people who are born on the full moon, that would be their lunar return. Your birthday is your solar return. So you could say, may your solar return bring you clarity of thought and allow you to define yourself the way you truly wish it to. So what would it be? That's a blessing you might say on someone's birthday, on someone's solar return. the lunar return, so the solar return allows you to redefine yourself, to consider how people are perceiving you. Are you the person you really want to be? How can you become the person you want to be? The lunar return is very emotional. You'll revisit some deep-seated feelings, some things that are, down deep inside of you, because, while the moon represents the subconscious, your feelings, where your feelings originate, it's deeper than just that. A lot of people say that the moon aligns with the unconscious, but you need to qualify that statement. That's not entirely accurate, because the unconscious can be both individual, right, which is what the moon governs, and it can also be collective, which is actually governed by Pluto, so we'll talk about it. The collective unconscious, the part of you that doesn't exist independently from everyone else who exists, the part of you that is one with all things, that exists outside of time and space and reality, that part of you has to be governed by a different planet, because how could the planet that governs your individual sense of being, your individual subconscious self, also govern your non-individual, right? That, to me, that doesn't really make sense. So the moon is your individual subconscious, and Pluto is like the way you connect to the collective unconscious. So, there's no consensus on the precise difference of unconscious versus subconscious anyway. The unconscious are things that you're not aware of at all. Subconscious are things that are going on like all the time, like you're breathing and you're blinking and that. And then your conscious mind is the actual thoughts you have. That's what it's supposed to be. So things dip in and out of each stage of consciousness as you're having thoughts and feelings and so on and so forth. So just know that, the moon governs the individual aspect of our worldly existence, and that's what the moon governs. Next we have Mercury. Mercury is Mercury and Venus form a pair of planets also, and these two are very foundational type planets. Mercury and Venus actually get doubled, and so does Mars, by the higher resonance planets. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the high resonance planets. But so Mercury associates with air. It governs the two signs actually, Gemini and Virgo. You'll notice that those are kind of different signs, really. A lot of different energies there. So it goes to show you the full range of Mercury as a archetype. Mercury is both communication and being romantic and that sort of thing, but it's also being diligent and being and so you have like a flirty side and a modest side, right? So you have many different, so Mercury can take on a couple different roles, and many people associate Mercury with being like with the throat, or like, because it governs communication, but communication is so much more than just speaking. So it governs the nerves and the lungs, actually, right? So Mercury is the foundation of speech, not the speech itself. It's any form of communication, any form of expression. It's your mentality. It's your nerves. It's if you're anxious, if you're feeling like social anxiety, if you have issues reaching out, then maybe that's because of your Mercury placement, right? It's an interaction of any form. It has an 88-day return, which means that it goes retrograde 2 to 3 times a year. It's very common retrograde. It's retrograde for like 2 to 3 weeks at a time. Retrograde means that the planet is moving backwards with respect to Earth because of the nature of the system. So we're rotating in space, orbiting around a sun, and the planets are also orbiting around the same. So we have this weird, double motion going on, and that sometimes causes planets to appear to be moving backwards for a period of time. And depending on which planet you're talking about, it's also just like based on where you are with respect to the planet too. So based on which planet you're talking about, it can sometimes be retrograde for a long time, sometimes months and months. And we'll talk about each of them in turn. But the retrograde energy just, it's brighter in the night sky, so the energy is just amplified. And it affects everyone differently. It depends on your own chart. So if you have Mercury in Gemini, and then during the Mercury retrograde, you're probably going to be a bundle of nerves all the time. Just nervous, nervous, nervous. But if you capitalize on that and you use the heightened sense of awareness that anxiousness often provides, then you can actually become a better speaker, a better public speaker, that sort of thing. And that's because Mercury is, in the house it rules, and it's retrograde, so that it would be very powerful influence over you. Let's talk about Venus. Well, actually, let me just make sure. So I want to just also touch on the fact that Mercury retrograde can interfere with technology as well. That's a big one. So when Mercury is retrograde, it's often hard to get in touch with people, so that it interferes with, like, I've had like weeks where it's just WebEx after WebEx goes down, or you can't connect or whatever. So that's often the plague of Mercury retrograde. Okay, now Venus. So Venus is associated with the element earth and also air. Sometimes it's associated with water because it's feminine, but I don't really get that association. It aligns with Taurus and Libra, so also earth and air sign. And this one aligns with the larynx and the throat. So some people are surprised by that because Venus governs like love in a chart, but what it's really governing is relationships of any kind. Collaboration, balance, right? And the key to a relationship is communication. So with Mercury, you have the foundation of communication. You have the lungs. That's a requirement. If without air, you can't make any noise, right? And then you have the larynx and the throat with Venus. So that's how you get the sense of refinement, right? So, so Venus embodies strength through balance and refinement, and knowing when to speak and when not to speak, and diplomacy, and that sort of thing. So it's in Taurus and Libra. So Libra, again, you see there's where the diplomacy is, okay? Because Libra is, the sign of that. So then you have the day, that's Friday, because many of these come from associations with Norse deities. So Venus would be associated with Freya, and it was originally like Freya Sig. So that was the original name. So Freya Day, Friday. That's also where you get Mars, like Tuesday. His name is Tu, and so that Tu is Mars, or the same deity. So that's where the day associations come from, if you're curious. The color for Venus is green, also sometimes pink or yellow, again because it also has air components and it governs relationships, which often manifest as love. And the collaborations we already talked about, and its return is 225 days, so it goes retrograde once a year. Sometimes I guess it might be twice a year because it's 2/3 of a year before it goes retrograde again. So the Venus retrograde is going on right now, I believe, or maybe it ended recently, but it usually lasts for like a month or a month and a half, or that's something like that. I can't remember exactly, but again, on the order of weeks for this one. And when Venus is retrograde, you'll see a lot of like fighting and issues communicating, issues getting along, that sort of thing. Depends on where it's located in the chart. Some people might find it easier to get along when Venus is retrograde. Again, it really depends. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the Earth sign. What does that even mean, right? None of you have heard of that. The Earth sign is actually an aspect, but it's called the Earth sign, so we're going to talk about it like it's a planet. It's formed from a triangle, which is why it's an aspect, and that's not a triangle, this is a square. Okay, it's formed from a triangle where you have the sun sign, the house, or the sign that's after the sun sign, and then the opposition to the sun sign. So you get a triangle. And that is how you interpret the Earth sign. That is what the Earth sign is. I realize that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's not like it ties to any specific one zodiacal sign. It doesn't have a day. It's usually given the colors blue and brown, right? Because we live on the water planet. As far as body parts go, it's the metaphysical self, your overall health, It's a little different than the spirit because it's not like, so Pluto aligns with the soul itself. This case, you're talking about the metaphysical self. So it's like the part that's right in between the soul and the physical self, right? So it's a little different. Elements, water and earth, obviously. It explains how you ground, how you stay centered, how you connect to spirits and ancestral energy. It can say something about your past lives. It also explains how well or poorly your animal and divine souls fuse. So is there a distinct difference between your mind and your body? Like, do you feel, or are you perfectly in sync and your mind is your body, right? You are your body. Do you feel that way, or do you feel like you're occupying a body? That's what I'm talking about there. And how your self manifests in a your metaphysical, your aura, color, the way, it's, and it doesn't have a return, I don't think, because it's just an aspect, so I'm sure it technically does, but it would be tied to the solar return. So it would be the same as the solar return, I guess, if you thought about it. But it's really not, it doesn't really have a return. It's really an aspect, not really a planet. But people refer to it as the sun, as a sign, so I included it here as a planet, just for your information. Okay, next we have Mars. Mars associates with the element fire. Body parts, the physical structure and the skeleton. Sign is Aries. It was historically aligned with Scorpio, but then we discovered Pluto, and Pluto definitely goes to Scorpio. So, like I said, the day is Tuesday. Its color is red. And Mars gets a bad rap because it's like the battle planet, so it's always like, oh, Mars is like how often you fight with people, right? But it's a little beyond that. So Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn kind of form like a triune, deity, kind of deal. And if you think about it, it's really like a story, right? It's like you gather enough energy, desire, and will, and that's Mars, and then you actively contract and expand using that energy and will, and that's Jupiter, the contraction and expansion. And then you move through the gates of time and see how that affects you, and that would be Saturn. So Mars is really a call to action. It's the preparation for the expansion, right? So it's the call to action, the drive to get to where you need to be, often by any means necessary, and often in an impactful way, which is why it gets that battle sign rep. So the keywords here you're thinking of, personality a bit, ego, definitely, willful intent, right? Self-assertion, but also progress, productivity. Often Mars will tell you something about how well people achieve things, or if they need to be in a team, or if they need to, be doing something creative in order to get things done. That sort of thing. It has a 2-year return. When Mars is retrograde, people can feel a lack of drive, a lack of energy. Some people feel a stronger drive, stronger energy. It just depends on, again, the chart and where the planet is retrograding and all the details. Okay, Jupiter. Jupiter associates mostly with fire. Some people also associate it with air. It governs cell growth and arterial health. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward association because, that's what cells do. Cells are always growing and dying, and that's how our bodies live on that constant life cycle. So think of Jupiter that way, the growing and dying, the expanding and contracting. It aligns with Sagittarius. It historically aligned with Pisces, but then we discovered Neptune. So it's just Sagittarius now. Sagittarius makes a lot of sense. I think that's a very straightforward association as well. It aligns with Thursday. Get it? Thor. So Jupiter and Thor, similar. Its color is purple, sometimes red. And Jupiter governs expansion, exploration, growth of any kind. It has a 12-year return. So now we're getting up to the higher, the larger planets, the longer orbits, and they really drive the changes of our life. So think about what happens every 12 years. First, you're becoming a teen, right? Then, 12 years later, you're 24, you're just getting started as an adult, you've either done college or trade school or something like that, but, you're at the stage where you're settling into adulthood and figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. When you're 36, that's often another, kind of a big moment where you realize, hey, maybe I'm not going to be famous. Maybe I'm not going to achieve this, that, or the other thing. You rethink your goals. You maybe become spiritual for the first time, whatever the case may be, and you see what's going next. So the pattern continues, right? And this is why we all have things like the midlife crisis, right? They come at around the same time because that's how the returns work. When many returns coincide with one another, that will dictate some event in your life, and you can tell what that event will be based on which signs the planets are in during the return. Saturn. Saturn is mostly associated with the Earth, but also with water. It aligns with Capricorn, historically also Aquarius, so that's why I don't really know why people would ever align it with water. For me, it's very earthy. I had this as a green slide before I saw that some people associate it with blue and black, and apparently associating with blue and black is way more common, which I just don't get. I mean, Saturn is very green and earthy to me, but hey, teach their own. Saturday, obviously Saturn day, right? Okay. It governs the bone, the teeth, and the skin. And the keywords for Saturn are structure, order, and time. I should have also put chaos on the slide because Saturn embodies both. Chaos and order are two sides of the same energy. So Saturn is, the sign that indicates whether someone is going to be more chaotic or more ordered, or the dreaded Saturn return occurs, when you're reaching your 30s, and if the planet goes retrograde, because it has such a long return, Saturn's retrograde, Jupiter's too, lasts for months. So it can, cross over and then retrograde back and then just sit right there in your sign, and then your return is going to last years if that happens, So it can really mess people up. It comes along and shakes things up and forces you to rethink the way your life is ordered and how much stuff you have. And it's a hoarder's nightmare, right? Because it's like it comes and cleans all your stuff out. So the person who taught me astrology gave me a story how she was like a very hoarder type person, and she came home from a conference and her husband thought he was doing her a favor and had packed up much of her basement into garbage bags and had it out on the curb, and she just walks home and sees all those bags on the curb and like loses it, and is trying to keep it in because she's so scared about what he got rid of, and she, right, so that happened around the time of her Saturn return and amongst other things, so that's a good example. So Saturn governs the illusion of time, okay, wasting time, missing people from a past time. How do you feel about time? Do you waste time? Do you procrastinate? Depending on where it's located in the chart, you can answer all of those types of questions. And when it's retrograde, again, often that brings chaos or a reorganization of some kind to you, that you have to accept and move forward with. Okay, so Uranus, now we're into the higher resonance planets. That's what they're called. So you have the two luminaries, and then you have the two Mercury and Venus, which are called something that the name escapes me. And then you have Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, who form a triad. And then you have the high resonance planets, which double Mars, Venus, and Mercury. I said them backwards. I don't know why. So Uranus doubles with Mercury. Its element is air. Sometimes also associated with fire and water. It's a very, Uranus has a very interesting energy. It governs the nervous system and our mental health, right? And it aligns with the sign Aquarius. So it's like how the collective consciousness, rather, the sphere of public knowledge comes together. That's what it governs. Okay, catalyzing, that's the key word. Catalyzing the collective consciousness. So it governs social media. Okay, it governs newspapers, books, Facebook, this YouTube channel. Okay, Uranus governs how people are able to find out information about the world consciously, how they interact with each other online, their online personality, the way they represent themselves when they're in a large group. Okay, it's got a long return, 84 years. So what people do, instead of letting, instead of saying, oh, it only returns once when you turn 84, they say that the Uranus return comes every 7 years. And that's just because 84 divided by 12, I think, right? Anyway, so so that's just what they say, that every 7 years that Uranus, you consider it to be a Uranus return, even though it's not really returned, that it's just symbolic. So when you're using the 7-year return, you can actually look at which constellation Uranus is in after 7 years, and that can give you some indication of what's going to happen when that return happens. You can think about Uranus as being like a force that affects you on a very deep level. It's the energy that is collectively collected. That is, and how that energy influences us in an individual way. And prominent placement of Uranus can make people very wired or very energized, and that's especially true during the Uranus retrograde. People get very wired. Uranus is retrograde right now, and it's driving me crazy. So what you have to do is just slow down and take it easy. And it's similar to the Mercury retrograde, where it affects your communication and the way you interact with the world. But where the Mercury retrograde can cause like havoc in terms of getting in touch with people, Uranus usually makes people anxious and sends things out into the collective conscious that make people even more anxious and that sort of thing. And slowing down and disconnecting from the world and taking your time and communicating with people is how you combat both of those retrogrades, basically. Neptune associates with water, very watery, governs our emotional health, aligns with Pisces, feel like that one's pretty obvious, and color, any form of blue. Keywords for Neptune are awareness of the collective consciousness, right? How do you feel about the world at large? Do you love humanity, hate humanity, couldn't give a crap about them? It also is your sense of oneness. Like, depending on where Neptune is placed in your chart, you will find it easier or harder to feel like you're one with everyone in the world. You'll find it easier or harder to be empathic, to be, empathetic. It also governs clarity through insight. So learning the facts. And that's interesting because it's a very watery emotional sign. And so, it's like, it's not like the facts like looking it up in a book. It's like learning because you were there and you experienced it, and now it's part of your, your experiences, and that has brought you some amount of insight or clarity, and it's how people relate to the entire world, to all of humanity. So the return on this one is 165 years. So obviously that'll never return in your lifetime. We consider it to be a 14-year return. Again, I think they just divided 165 by 14 and it gives you 12 or something. No, that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, there's some way of they calculated the 14 years from some, I don't remember. But the important thing is that, again, it might be in a different sign during the 14-year return because it's not actually returning. So you can actually look and see what sign it's in every 14 years, and it gives you some idea of what is going to happen. Note that there's like certain times where these numbers will overlap, and like one of them is like, I think 56. So when 56 happens, you have like a bunch of returns all at the same time, and hence the midlife crisis, right? So that's where these stages of life come from, are the planetary returns. Okay, Pluto. Pluto is a dwarf planet. We're going to talk in a minute about dwarf planets, but it is a planet. It's large enough to have an effect on us. It's a very, very tiny, subtle effect, but it has one. And so that's why it aligns with the element spirit. Sometimes people align it with water. It's very, spiritual planet. It describes how you actually connect to spirituality. And it's very interesting because despite that, it aligns with Scorpio, because it's like, Scorpio is kind of like something that you might expect to be an immature sign at times. The people who have Scorpios in their charts can often act immaturely, but that's not the essence of Scorpio. The essence of Scorpio is mystery, is finding the means to evolve in seeking. And Pluto is aligned with that as well, right? Pluto is searching for the answers, and in that search you may or may not find the answers that you were searching for, but you find some answers, you find some insight, you grow as a person. So some keywords here: the manifestation of the physical self, the manifestation of the spiritual self in this lifetime. It's your past thoughts, your past lives, your subconscious experiences. Pluto is the call to bring those things to light, to the part of you that wants to understand yourself and be aware of why you do what you do. And it governs the collective unconscious. So Pluto could be said really to describe how you interact with the collective unconscious. How does that information come to you? How is it received? So we're talking about the collective unconscious. That's from Jung, Carl Jung's psychological model, very widely accepted and highly acclaimed way of considering psychological phenomenon. So in this model, the collective unconsciousness is really just all of the archetypes and tropes and everything that humans tap into without thinking or knowing why. And sometimes they may not even be familiar with the myth in its entirety, but they will find themselves having dreams with symbols and such things from those deities. And the reason for this, according to psychology, is that the world has been shaped by these myths, and so you cannot escape them, and the symbols will be found somewhere in your experiences no matter what happens. And whether or not you want to consider this to be some magical phenomenon is up to you. I consider it to be magical, right? So the collective unconscious is the culmination of all of the archetypes of deity, of demons, of everything, right? So any person who works with deity is interacting with the collective unconscious. That's what they're doing. They're connecting to the part of us that is one with everything. And that's what Pluto governs, how they connect to that. So if it's in Pisces, then they connect through an imagined world and dreams and visualization and divination, and they would be a very spiritual person, probably. If Pluto were in, say, what's one that I could do? Virgo, then that might mean that you are connecting to spirituality through analytical research, diligence, right? So you have to, and maybe it would also say that you connect to spirituality because it makes you feel good about yourself, because Virgos tend to be very harsh on themselves. So maybe that would indicate that. Again, you have to look at the locations of all of the planets in order to do a real star chart. So you can't really say anything specific until you look at all of the planets. Okay, so there are potential for other planets, just like there are potential for new signs. We talked about Ophiuchus, that's a new sign on the zodiac. I have tentatively aligned it with the Kuiper belt, but I expect that Ophiuchus should really be aligned with a new planet that we have found. It's also a dwarf planet. It's very similar size to Pluto, and it's out in the same distance from Earth as Pluto, out in the Kuiper belt, which is the asteroid belt in the far outskirts of the solar system. There are likely many hundreds of others in the Kuiper belt, so as time goes on, we may find ourselves adding another planet or two. Most of the dwarf planets are not large enough to really have an impact on us. They're hardly larger than asteroids. So like Sedna and Ceres, for instance, are very far away. They do have an effect on the chart as asteroids, but not as planets. And you can read more about that in the book that's in the homework. It's on page 139 if you're interested, Ceres. There's a lot of asteroids that you could use in your astrological calculations as well, and that's probably something that Nostradamus would have used and considered, because he gave very specific dates for when certain things were going to happen. But if you're not trying to get that specific, just doing like a natal chart, that sort of thing, you definitely don't have to worry about where all the comets were located. That would be like a crazy amount of detail. Definitely unnecessary at that stage. You just got to look at the planets. So dwarf planets that are larger than a certain size do have to be considered. As humans evolve, the higher resonance planets, these higher resonance planets, I call them, because they're on top of the the already existing high resonance planets, these ones will start to influence us in very subtle ways, and they need to be characterized. Many of them have not been looked at all because people are very slow to consider that they need to change what they're doing. And people don't like to have to change what they're doing. And that's why people are so resistant to using astronomical tools to get dates, because it's hard and they don't want it to be hard. They want to feel like they know what they're doing. But I take a very scientific approach to my practices. I'm a scientist. I have a degree in physics. So for me, I think it's important to constantly update the way that you do things when you gather new information. And we've gathered new information. We found another dwarf planet that's the same size or similar size to Pluto, and it's called Eris. I expect that Eris probably aligns with Ophiuchus, but I have not characterized Eris yet. And I plan to characterize Eris independently from that ideology, hopefully without bias, and then just see if Eris's characterization aligns with Ophiuchus or not. It's possible that there is another dwarf planet we haven't discovered that would align with Ophiuchus, and that Eris aligns with another zodiacal sign that's not prominently on the zodiac yet, like Serpens, which is on the zodiac in the southern hemisphere. For the northern hemisphere, it's not on the zodiac yet, but it might be. So it's possible that some of these dwarf planets align with zodiacal signs that are still that are being added to the zodiac because of the way our solar system is shifting. For now, I can't say anything about them. I have not characterized them at all. Ophiuchus I spent time characterizing, but Eris I only learned about a couple weeks ago, so or months ago now. Man, I don't even know how much time has passed. But I have to spend time actually doing charts, many charts, where I look at Eris and ask them questions that might help me characterize what it would mean. And that's it for this. Looks like we did okay on time, 46 minutes. I was hoping to keep it a little shorter. Now we've covered the zodiac and the planets. Next time we will be talking about the houses. So stay tuned. If you are following along and reading the encyclopedia that we're reading on astrology, then these are all of the sections I recommend reading this week. Some of them are very short, only like a couple paragraphs, like dispositor. That's just a term. It's the definition of a term. I would make sure you know what all these things are. And I would read, for sure, any of the ones that are on the planets, like Mars, Mercury, the Moon, because they're only a couple pages each, and they'll give you a full overview of what's out there right now. And I only give you what I know from my experiences and from my teacher. So go and learn a different way of doing it, get some other perspectives, and then you can decide what the planets mean in for yourself. Because again, it's an art too. Knowing where the planets are located, having accurate starting data is important, but it's also important to be able to interpret that for yourself, and how you interpret the meaning of all of these planets and signs will be different. Hypothetically, you and I could both sit down and do the same chart and come to the same conclusions, but how you get to those conclusions might be different. So that's for you to decide how different you want it to be. I hope this helped, guys. And if you have any questions, put a comment on our video here, or shoot us an email at covenantofopenmind@gmail.com. I'll remind everyone that we have a marketplace on our website now. On the marketplace, you can find offerings from our open-minded lineage members. There are only a couple right now because people are working on their ads, but I do offer to do astrology readings for people. I have a terrible business model because here I am teaching you all the things you need to know to do it yourself. But if you wanted to get a professional reading done, I've done hundreds of readings, and I do them for $25 each, and you can find the information up on the marketplace on our website. And if you have any questions, definitely shoot us an email, drop a comment, and we're happy to hear from you. If not, then thanks for watching, and from everyone here at the Covenant of Open Mind, blessed be.